In 1989, 6 young members of a gospel band vanished without a trace. The bus they were traveling in disappeared on the highway and was never seen again. For 26 years, the case remained unsolved, an open wound, a mystery that no one could explain. But then, in a remote area near Mount Rainier National Park, the police find something inside an abandoned mine. A grim discovery that raises more frightening questions than anyone was ready to face. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're listening to this case. FBI investigator Lena Truitt stared at the wall of her office as the rain lashed against the windows of the federal building in Seattle. The bulletin board was covered with black and white photos, yellowed newspaper clippings, and in the center, a missing poster with the faces of 6 smiling young women. The Promise Path, a gospel band that 26 years ago had become an urban legend. One of those unsolved mysteries that haunted the history of the American Northwest. Lena took a sip of her already cold coffee, her eyes fixed on the photo of Rachel Brooks, the lead singer. Intense eyes, a confident smile, dark curly hair falling over her shoulders. She was the most well-known face of the 6, the one whose voice could silence crowds with its perfect high notes and lyrics about redemption. Beside her, the other 5 musicians, Deborah, Elise, Anna Claire, Patricia, and Melissa, all between 19 and 22 years old, all vanished without a trace in the summer of 1989. Now, in 2015, Lena shouldn't have been looking at this case. 26. Years had passed. The file should have remained in the cold case section, along with hundreds of others. But when the phone rang that morning in March, something changed. "Agent Truitt," she answered automatically. "We found a bus," said the voice on the other end, "in Mount Rainier, in an abandoned mine. It has the words, 'The Promise Path,' painted on the side." Lena felt her heart race. This was how cold cases came back to life, not with grand revelations, but with small fragments that surfaced when no one expected them anymore. 3 hours later, she parked her pickup truck at the base of a muddy trail leading to the partially obstructed entrance of the mine. The rain was now just a fine drizzle, but enough to make the ground treacherous. Flashes of light flickered from the dark interior of the cave, where forensic technicians were already working. "This way, Agent Truitt," called a police officer, leading her inside with a flashlight. The smell of dampness and oxidized metal hit Lena first. Then, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw it. A large white bus, now brown with rust, leaning against the rock wall. The faded red stripes were still visible under the layer of dust. And on the broken windshield, the almost ghostly letters, "The Promise Path." "How did this get here?" Lena murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Amateur spelunkers," replied the forensic technician who approached. He was a middle-aged man with deep, dark circles under his eyes. "They came in yesterday, found this, and called the authorities. The entrance was partially sealed with explosives at some point, but the collapse wasn't complete." Lena circled the vehicle slowly, observing every detail. The side windows were broken, some completely missing. The driver's door was ajar. The rear had impact marks. Someone tried to hide evidence, she concluded. They wanted this bus to never be found. When the technicians opened the doors of the vehicle, the past invaded the present. Inside, preserved by the constant temperature of the cave, were musical instruments, an electronic keyboard, 2 guitars, a bass. Suitcases open with clothes scattered. Bibles marked with colored sticky notes. Diaries with pages torn out. A folded tour poster showing performance dates. "We're finding recent fingerprints," said the technician, pointing to certain spots inside the bus. "They're not old. Some are less than a year." Lena's blood ran cold. That would mean that... "Yes," confirmed the technician. "Someone who was on this bus in 1989 returned here recently." That same night, Lena found herself in the small apartment she rented in Seattle, surrounded by archive boxes. After so long, the case of the missing Promise Path girls seemed to come alive once more. And there was something about it that touched her deeply. Maybe it was because she had also grown up in a religious community, although she had left that life behind long ago. Or maybe it was Rachel Brooks's look in that photo, a look that seemed to hide something much bigger than simple musical ambition. Among the documents, Lena found a list of phone calls. She picked up her cell phone and dialed the first number. Helen. "Brooks?" she asked when a tired voice answered. "Yes? This is Agent Lena Truitt from the FBI. It's about your daughter, Rachel." A heavy silence settled on the line until the woman's voice returned, now trembling. You found her? After all these years?" "Not exactly, Mrs. Brooks. But we found the band's bus, and there is evidence that someone has been there recently." The sigh on the other end of the line was like a breath of hope, long held back. "I always knew," said Helen Brooks with a conviction that surprised Lena. "I always knew my daughter wasn't dead. I dream of her almost every night, and in my dreams, she is alive, Agent Truitt, alive and trying to come home." Lena hesitated, before speaking again, aware of the danger of giving false hope. "Mrs. Brooks, I'd like to schedule an interview with you. There are things I need to ask, details that maybe only you can help me understand." "Come tomorrow," Helen replied quickly. "I've kept her room exactly as it was the day she left." The E. Next day, Lena drove to the suburbs of Seattle, where a small wooden house stood out because of the number of flowers in the front yard. Helen Brooks was a small woman with gray hair and intense green eyes, the same eyes as Rachel in the photographs. The interior of the house was a shrine to her daughter's memory. Photos on the walls, trophies from singing competitions, her first guitar hanging on the living room wall. But it was in Rachel's room that Lena felt the true weight of frozen time. The bed was perfectly made, with a purple quilt. Posters of Christian bands from the 80s decorated the walls. On the desk, an open notebook showed handwritten song lyrics. She wrote all the band's songs, Helen explained, running her hand over the notebook. Rachel had a gift for turning her faith into poetry. That's why Promise Path was different. They weren't just pretty songs about God, they were deep reflections on what it really means to believe in something. Lena looked at the last written page. The words jumped out at her. "There are paths that seem right to the eyes of men, but in the end they lead to death. Do not trust the voices that stray, even when they speak in the name of heaven." "Is that from the Bible?" Lena asked. "Partially." Rachel always mixed biblical verses with her own reflections. In the last weeks before the tour, she seemed worried about something. Worried how? Helen sat on the bed, smoothing the quilt with her hands. Rachel received some strange phone calls. She didn't tell me much, but I overheard part of a conversation. Someone had contacted the band offering a special performance in an isolated religious community. Something about taking their music to people who rarely had contact with the outside world. Lena frowned. Was that show on the official schedule? No. It was a last-minute invitation. Rachel told me it was an opportunity sent by God, that it could change their lives. The last time we spoke, she mentioned a man named Jonah. She said he had a special vision for the future of faith. Jonah? Any last name? I don't remember. But Rachel seemed impressed with him. She said he understood things about the scriptures that no one else saw. Lena noted the name in her notepad. It was the first concrete clue in decades. While flipping through Rachel's notebook, a photo fell out from between the pages. It showed the 6 girls from the band smiling, embracing in front of a rural church. On the back, an inscription, "Rehearsal in Spokane." Jonah invited us to learn about the true path after here. He says our music can save lost souls. "Mrs. Brooks, can I take this photo?" "It might be important." Helen nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. "Do you really think my daughter can be alive after all this time, Agent Truitt?" Lena hesitated. The honest answer would be that missing person cases over 2 decades old rarely ended with happy endings. But something about those recent fingerprints, the mysterious photo and the words of warning in Rachel's notebook left her uneasy. "I'm going to find her," Lena replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Alive or either way. I'm going to find out what happened to your daughter and the other girls." As Lena was about to leave, Helen grabbed her arm. "There's something I never told the other investigators," she said, her voice almost a whisper. 3 years after the disappearance, I received a package with no return address. Inside there was only a cassette tape. It was Rachel's voice singing a song I had never heard before, a song about prison, about invisible walls, and faith tested to the limit. I always thought it was a sign, that she was telling me that she was alive but trapped somewhere. Do you still have that tape? Helen nodded, heading to a drawer. She handed Lena a small unlabeled cassette. Listen to it, and you'll understand why I never lost hope. That night in her apartment, Lena inserted the tape into an old Walkman that she had unearthed from a used goods store. The first sounds were static. Then a voice began to sing softly as if afraid of being heard. These walls are not made of stone, but they hold tighter than any cage. He speaks of heaven but builds hell. Each day is a test of eternal faith. If you are listening, know that I am alive, but the promised path has become a lie. The voice trembled, and the recording ended abruptly. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. That wasn't just a song, it was a plea for help. The next day, armed with the name Jonah and the photo found in Rachel's room, Lena initiated a search in the FBI files. It didn't take long to find a match. Jonah Krieger, a former pastor expelled from his congregation in 1986 for extremist doctrines and coercive behavior. After his expulsion, Krieger had disappeared off the radar, supposedly to found his own religious community. The last known photo of him showed a man with a grey beard and penetrating eyes. Something in that look made Lena shudder, the same fanatical intensity that she had seen in cultists during other cases. As she deepened her research on Krieger, Lena's phone rang. "Agent Truitt, it's the lab. We have a match for the recent fingerprints found on the bus. They belong to Rachel Brooks, and they were left there approximately 8 months ago." Lena's heart leaped. Rachel Brooks had been on that bus less than a year ago. After 26 years of being missing, she was alive, and maybe, finally, trying to leave a trail. Snow fell heavily on the isolated terrain in the mountains of Idaho. From the window of her wooden cabin, Rachel Brooks watched the white flakes slowly cover the high fences that surrounded the property. 26 years in that place had taught her that beauty could be the cruelest of prisons. At 48 years old, Rachel still maintained the same intense eyes of her youth, although now they were marked by worry lines. Her hair, once abundant and dark, was now thin and grey, cut short according to the rules. She wore a simple grey cotton dress, the mandatory uniform for all the daughters of the true path. "It's almost time for the gathering," said a voice behind her. Rachel turned to face Deborah, her friend of 2.5 decades of captivity. Unlike her, Deborah had conformed to her life there, or at least that's what she pretended to survive. "He's going to talk about the return," Deborah continued, adjusting her own grey dress. "He says he received a new revelation." Rachel nodded silently. Jonah Krieger's revelations had become more frequent and more disturbing in recent months. The man who had once convinced them to follow him on a special mission was now visibly unbalanced, consumed by paranoia and apocalyptic delusions. "It's not going to work this time, Deb," Rachel murmured, making sure no one else could hear them. "I found a way." Deborah's eyes widened in alarm. They had already tried to escape 7 times over the years. Each attempt had resulted in severe punishments, isolation, food deprivation, and in the worst cases, the purification sessions in the basement of the main house. "No," Deborah whispered, grabbing Rachel's arm. "You promised you wouldn't try anymore. You almost died last time, and the others, they couldn't take another punishment." Rachel looked out the window again at the dense forest beyond the fences. Somewhere out there was the real world, a world that had probably already forgotten them. "I managed to get back to the bus," Rachel confessed in a low voice. "The last time he took me to town to work at the store, I slipped away for a few hours. I left clues, Deb. Someone will find them." Deborah paled. "If he finds out." "He won't. And if I'm right, we don't have much time. Haven't you noticed? His revelations, the supplies he's stocking, the new weapons. Jonah is planning something terrible." Before Deborah could respond, the complex bell rang 3 times. The call to the gathering. The 2 women exchanged tense glances and left the cabin, joining the silent flow of people heading to the large communal hall. The interior of the hall was austere, simple wooden benches arranged in rows, bare walls except for hand-painted biblical verses, and a raised pulpit from where Jonah Krieger commanded his followers. The place was lit only by oil lamps, creating unsettling shadows that danced on the walls. Rachel spotted the other 4 women who had once formed the Promise Path with her. Elise and Anna Claire were sitting together as always. Patricia, who suffered from chronic health problems due to years of inadequate nutrition, was leaning on Melissa, the youngest of them, who was only 19 years old when they were abducted. Now, they were all middle-aged women who had spent more time in captivity than in freedom. Some, like Anna Claire, had even had children there, children born in isolation who had never known the outside world. Jonah Krieger ascended to the pulpit with the same domineering presence he had always had, despite his now 70 years. Tall and thin, with a white beard that reached his chest, he wore what he called the robes of the prophet, a simple white robe that contrasted with the grey clothes of the followers. "My children," he began, his voice reverberating through the hall, "the time is approaching, the signs are clear. The world out there is coming to its prophesied end, and only we, the chosen of the true path, will be spared from destruction." Rachel observed the faces around her. There were about 40 people in total, some of whom had voluntarily joined over the years, attracted by Krieger's rhetoric. Others, like her and her friends, never had a choice. "I received a new revelation," Krieger continued, his eyes shining with feverish intensity. "In exactly 30 days we must complete our separation from this corrupt world. The final passage is near." A murmur ran through the audience. Rachel felt her blood run cold. Final passage was the euphemism Krieger used to talk about death, the transition to what he called the next level of existence. "To prepare you," Krieger continued, "we need sacred music, music that will lift our souls." His eyes met Rachel's. "Rachel, you and your Promise sisters will sing again. You will prepare chants for the passage." It was as if the air had been sucked out of the hall. For more than 2 decades, Krieger had forbidden Rachel and the others from singing together, fearing that the music would strengthen the bond between them and revive memories of their past life. Music was power, and he had always kept that power away from them. "But father," intervened a man sitting near the pulpit, Marcus, Krieger's biological son and his right-hand man in the cult. "You always said that their singing was dangerous for the community." Krieger smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Times have changed, my son. Now we need their music for a greater purpose, to prepare everyone for the passage." After the meeting, the 6 former members of the Promise Path were taken to a separate room, a space that had once been used as a warehouse, now emptied except for some dusty instruments. "He's planning a mass suicide," Rachel whispered as soon as they were alone. "That's what final passage means." "We can't be sure," replied Elise, always the most cautious. "Maybe it's just another one of his metaphors." "Did you see the supplies that arrived last week?" Rachel asked. Marcus was unloading boxes of chemicals. "I heard him talking about preparing the elixir of passage." Patricia began to cry silently. "My son, my little David, he's only 7 years old. I can't let that happen." Rachel approached her friends, forming a tight circle. "Listen, this may be our only chance. He finally made a mistake by bringing us together. Together, maybe we can find a way out of here before it's too late." "And how would we do that?" asked Melissa, her voice trembling with fear. "The fences are electrified. There are armed guards. And even if we managed to escape, where would we go? We don't even know where we are anymore." "Idaho," Rachel replied firmly. "We're somewhere in the mountains of Idaho. I heard Marcus mentioning the nearest town once, Sandpoint. It's about 2 hours from here." The others stared at her in surprise. "How do you know that?" asked Anna Claire. Rachel hesitated, but then decided it was time for the truth, "Because I managed to get out of here twice. The last time I went to our bus. It's hidden in an abandoned mine near Mount Rainier National Park. I left fingerprints everywhere. I left a hidden message. And now I think someone found it." "How can you be sure?" asked Deborah. "Because in town, I saw a newspaper. There was a small note about explorers having found an old vehicle in a mine. It didn't mention our names, but it was our bus, I'm sure. A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed the information. Finally, it was Elise who spoke. So, what's the plan? The next morning, as the community prepared for the daily work, Rachel and the others began rehearsals for the chants of passage. To any observer, they seemed to be simply obeying Krieger's orders, but each song they composed contained coded messages, words that, when interpreted correctly, revealed their location and the imminent threat they faced. "We need to find a way to record this and get it to the outside world," said Rachel as she adjusted an old guitar. "Jacob," whispered Anna Claire. Jacob was one of the few men in the community who showed signs of doubt about Krieger's teachings. He worked at the small store that the cult maintained in the town, a facade for limited interactions with the outside world. "He has access to the city. Maybe he could help." "It's too risky," argued Deborah. "If he betrays us—" "We have no choice," Rachel interrupted. "We have less than 30 days before Krieger executes his plan. We need to act now." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Lena Truitt had set up an operations room dedicated to the Promise Path case. Maps, photos, and timelines covered the walls. A team specializing in cases of sects and religious cults had been formed, including psychologists, negotiation experts, and tactical agents. "We have 3 main leads," Lena explained to the assembled group. "First, we know that Jonah Krieger disappeared off the radar in 1987 after being expelled from his church in Oregon. Second, we have evidence that Rachel Brooks was on the bus, recently leaving fingerprints. And third, we found records of an isolated property in Idaho purchased by a shell company linked to Krieger." "You think he kept these women in captivity for 26 years?" asked one of the agents, clearly skeptical. "It wouldn't be the first case," replied the team's psychologist, Dr. Emerson. "Isolationist cults often keep followers completely separated from society for decades. Mind control, combined with physical barriers and fear, can be extremely effective." "And why would Rachel have returned to the bus after so long?" questioned another agent. Lena pointed to the cassette tape she had received from Helen Brooks. "Because she's trying to send a signal. This recording from 3 years after the disappearance was already a plea for help. Now, with the fingerprints on the bus, she's leaving a clearer trail. The question is, why now? What has changed after 26 years? That made her risk everything to attempt contact." Lena's phone rang, interrupting the meeting. She answered quickly and her face paled as she listened. "I understand, we're on our way." Hanging up, she turned to the team. "We just received an anonymous tip. A small store in Sandpoint, Idaho, received a cassette tape with a recording of women singing what appears to be a coded plea for help. The informant identified the voices as being those of the Promise Path members." Hours later, Lena was listening to the recording in a small police station in Sandpoint. The quality was poor, but the voices were unmistakable. 6 women singing in perfect harmony. "In the northern mountains where the sky meets the earth, the true path prepares for the final war. 30 days until the passage, when all will drink from the cup of sacrifice that the false prophet prepared." The chorus was even more explicit. Hidden coordinates in the prisoner's song, "Find us before time runs out." Sep 7, 8 and 11 degram N, 116, 39, 94 degram W. The promised path begs for salvation. "They literally sang the coordinates," murmured Lena, typing the numbers into her phone. The map showed a remote spot in the mountains of Idaho, about an hour from Sandpoint. "They're alive, and they're telling us exactly where to find them." "There's more," said the local police officer, a middle-aged man named Harrington. "The guy who brought the tape is waiting outside, says he works for an isolated religious community. Apparently he risked everything to bring this to us." Jacob, a young man of approximately 25 years with frightened eyes and trembling hands, told Lena how he had been raised in Krieger's community, knowing only the teachings of the Father for his entire life. It was only when he started working at the town store at 20 that he realized there was something deeply wrong with his world. "Rachel convinced me," he explained, looking nervously out the window, as if afraid of being watched. "She showed me how the scriptures that Jonah teaches us have been distorted, how he manipulates everything to maintain control, and then she told me about his plan, What plan? Asked Lena, feeling a knot in her stomach. The final passage. He's preparing something. A drink. He says we all have to drink it to ascend to the next level. But I overheard Marcus, his son, talking about the ingredients. It's poison agent, Truitt. He plans to kill everyone. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a race against time to prevent a mass tragedy. When is this going to happen? In 28 days, Jacob replied. On the full moon in April. He says that's when the portal will be open. Lena looked at the calendar on the wall of the precinct. 28 days. Less than a month to plan and execute an extremely delicate operation in remote terrain, against an armed group potentially willing to die for their beliefs. Jacob, I need you to tell me everything about the compound. Every building, every routine, every person. And especially about Rachel and the other women in the band. As Jacob described the cult's structure in detail, Lena realized the magnitude of what they were facing. It wasn't just the rescue of 6 missing women, it was the liberation of dozens of people, including children born in captivity, from a terrible fate. Back at the community, Rachel was called to Jonah Krieger's private office, a room in the main house to which few had access. Her heart pounded as she entered the austere space, decorated only with religious books and old maps. Krieger was sitting behind a dark wooden desk, his piercing eyes fixed on her. Beside him was Marcus, his son, and faithful executor of his darkest orders. Rachel, said Krieger, his voice soft but laden with authority. Your chants are inspired. I feel the divine presence in them. She kept her eyes down, as she had learned to do over the years. Showing direct eye contact with the Father was considered an act of defiance. Thank you, Father. I'm just following the inspiration you guided us to seek. Krieger rose slowly and walked around the desk, approaching her. Rachel smelled the familiar scent of sandalwood that he always wore, an odor that, after 26 years, had become synonymous with terror for her. But there's something that intrigues me, he continued, circling her like a predator. The melody has patterns, unusual patterns, almost as if it contains messages. Rachel's heart skipped a beat, but her face remained impassive. Years of practice in hiding her emotions were now her only protection. It's just the musical structure we learned before coming here, Father. 6-part harmonies like we used to. Marcus stepped forward, throwing something onto the table. It was a small cassette tape, identical to the one Jacob had taken to town. We found this copy in your belongings, he said, his voice cold. Why would you record the rehearsals without permission? Rachel felt a wave of panic, but maintained her composure. So we could listen and improve our harmony, Marcus. We wanted it to be perfect for the passage. Krieger smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rachel. After so many years, do you think I don't know when you're lying? He approached, touching her face with cold fingers. It was always you, wasn't it? The one who never really accepted. The one who secretly resisted. No, Father, she protested, feeling involuntary tears welling up in her eyes. I am faithful to the path. Jacob has disappeared, Marcus interrupted abruptly. He didn't come back from town today. Krieger narrowed his eyes, studying every micro-expression on Rachel's face. Interesting, he murmured. And now you're here with a hidden recording, while our only contact with the outside town disappears. Rachel knew she was in mortal danger. If Krieger suspected the plan, not only she but all the others would be severely punished, or worse. Maybe he was detained by something in town, she suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. The snow was heavy on the road yesterday. Krieger watched her for a long moment, then smiled again. Yes, maybe. Anyway, it doesn't matter anymore. The passage is near, and you, my dear Rachel, will have the honor of being the first to drink from the sacred cup. He turned to Marcus. Move up the schedule. We can no longer wait for the full moon. In 3 days we will initiate the passage. Rachel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. 3 days, not 28. Just 3 days until Krieger executed his plan of mass destruction, and to ensure that there are no more misunderstandings, Krieger continued. You will be under constant supervision until the sacred day. Marcus will monitor you personally. When Rachel was escorted back to the lodging, she found the other 5 women waiting anxiously for news. Their faces fell when they saw Marcus following her closely. "Change of plans, ladies," announced Marcus. "Rehearsals will continue under my direct supervision, and the passage has been moved forward. Our father has graciously decided that we no longer need to wait for the full moon." After he left, positioning himself outside the door, the women gathered in a tight circle, pretending to review the musical scores. "He knows," Rachel whispered. "Jacob disappeared. I think he managed to get to town, but Krieger suspects something." "How?" "So much time do we have?" asked Melissa, her face pale with fear. 3 days, Rachel replied. "He wants me to be the first to drink." Patricia stifled a sob. "My God, it's too soon. No one will come in time." Rachel looked at each of them. Her friends, her sisters in captivity for more than 2 decades. Together they had endured the unbearable, keeping a small flame of hope alive even in the darkest moments. "We can't wait for rescue now," she said firmly. "We have to create our own way out." At the FBI office in Seattle, Agent Lena Truitt was in the middle of an emergency video conference with the director and the tactical team. "So we don't have 28 days, she explained urgently. "According to our informant, Krieger has moved up his plans. The mass suicide is scheduled to happen in less than 72 hours. Director Parker frowned. "Truitt, you're asking me to authorize a high-risk tactical operation in isolated mountainous terrain against an armed group based on the testimony of a single informant. Sir, we have the exact coordinates, we have the recording, and now we have confirmation that there are children in the compound. If we wait for normal procedure, they'll be dead," completed the cult specialist, Dr. Emerson. "Director, we've seen this before. Jonestown, Waco, Heaven's Gate. When cult leaders feel they are losing control, they often accelerate their transition plans. If Krieger suspects that there has been a breach in his isolation, he won't wait." The director looked at the reports in front of him, then at the map showing the remote location of the compound. "Do we have any floor plans of the location?" Lena gestured, and a detailed map appeared on the screen. "Jacob provided us with this. 6 main buildings. The leader's house, 2 communal dormitories, a cafeteria, meeting hall, a storage building, and a structure they call the sanctuary, where the ritual will likely take place." "How many people are we talking about?" "Approximately 40 adults and 12 children. Not all of them are being held against their will. Some have voluntarily joined the cult over the years, but the 6 women from Promise Path are definitely prisoners, along with their children." "What about weaponry?" Jacob confirms that there are at least 8 hunting rifles and some handguns. Security is mainly maintained by Marcus, Krieger's son, and 3 other trusted men. The director took a deep breath. "You have authorization. But, Truitt, I want a plan that minimizes casualties. These people are victims, even those who think they aren't." "Yes, sir. We are already mobilizing a team. We will be on site in 18 hours. Meanwhile, at the True Path compound, Rachel and the others rehearsed the chants under Marcus's watchful eye. Their voices echoed through the hall as they desperately tried to find a way to communicate that he couldn't detect. "From the chorus, again," instructed Rachel, making significant eye contact with Deborah. It was a code they had developed years. Her Deborah was to create a distraction. As they sang, Deborah suddenly paled and fell to the ground, feigning a faint. As expected, Marcus rushed to check on her, at which point Rachel quickly whispered to the others, "Tonight, when everyone is asleep." The tool shed. Marcus turned his attention back to the group. "What's going on here?" "She's not eating properly," explained Melissa, kneeling beside Deborah. "She's very nervous about the passage, we all are." Marcus seemed satisfied with the explanation, his arrogance preventing him from seeing the lie. "Take her to the dormitory. We'll continue tomorrow. The passage requires strength. You all need to be in perfect condition." That night, while the community slept, Rachel crept silently through the darkness. The snow had stopped, but the cold was intense, penetrating through her thin coat. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but she knew their patterns after years of observing them. In the tool shed, she found the other 5 women already waiting, trembling as much from cold as from fear. "We can't just run," said Elise. always the voice of reason. "The fences are electrified, there are armed guards, and even if we managed to get through, we're in the middle of a forest in the dead of winter." "We're not going to run," replied Rachel, her voice surprisingly calm. "We're going to fight." She removed some loose boards from the floor, revealing a small, hidden compartment. From inside, she pulled out several objects carefully collected over the years: a hand-drawn map of the area, a heavy wrench, some tools, and most importantly, a small crank radio. "How did you get this?" asked Anna Claire, looking at the radio with amazement. "I stole parts from the store in town one by one for years. I assembled it here, hidden. I never had the courage to use it before because I wasn't sure if anyone would be listening. But now..." Rachel turned the crank, generating enough power to turn on the device. She tuned into an emergency frequency, and in a trembling voice spoke, "My name is Rachel Brooks from the gospel band The Promise Path. We are being held prisoner by Jonah Krieger at coordinates 47.8 de ground N 116.39994 de W. He plans a mass suicide in less than 48 hours. There are children here. Please, if anyone is listening, we need help immediately." She repeated the message 3 times before the radio's power ran out. There was no way to know if anyone had heard. "What now?" asked Patricia. "Now we create a plan B," Rachel replied firmly. "Because even if no one comes, we're not going to die here. Not after surviving for 26 years. The next morning, as the women rehearsed again under surveillance, unusual activity began at the compound. Followers carried supplies to the sanctuary, the large circular building where the most important rituals were performed. Children were gathered for special lessons. And more disturbingly, Marcus and other trusted men checked their weapons openly. He moved it up again, whispered Elise during a break in rehearsal. "He's not going to wait 3 days." Rachel watched from the window as Krieger walked through the compound, stopping to talk to several followers. His gestures were broad and inspiring, the prophet preparing his flock for the great journey. "Tonight," she said to the others. "He's going to do it tonight." Meanwhile, less than 20 miles away, a convoy of unmarked vehicles moved silently along back roads. At the front, Lena Truitt studied a map while communicating via radio with the tactical teams. "Our informant confirms that the main access point is guarded, but there is a secondary entrance on the north side, through the forest. The radio signal, received last night, corroborates our previous information. They are accelerating the schedule." The plan was complex but clear. Tactical teams would surround the perimeter, cutting off communications and electricity to the compound. Negotiators would first attempt peaceful contact, while snipers positioned themselves to intervene if necessary. The priority was the safety of the hostages, especially the children. "Remember," Lena instructed the team, "many of these followers are victims as much as the women we've come to rescue. They have been subjected to years of brainwashing. Some were born there and have never known another reality." The sun was beginning to set when they arrived at a point 2 miles from the compound. From there, they moved on foot, advancing silently through the snow-covered forest. At the compound, Rachel and the others were taken to the sanctuary for the final performance before the ceremony. The large circular building was lit by hundreds of candles, creating an ethereal and hypnotic atmosphere. In the center, a large glass container held a bluish liquid. Jonah Krieger, dressed completely in white, greeted them with a serene smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "My daughters," he said, "today is the day of our liberation. After decades of preparing the way, the moment has finally come for us to transcend this corrupted world." Rachel looked around, noting that almost all members of the community were already gathered, sitting in concentric circles around the central container. Young children were on their parents' laps, some sleeping, others looking curiously at the candles. Her heart ached to see Patricia's son David, holding a small worn teddy bear. "First," continued Krieger, "we will listen to the song of our messengers. The voices that once called the world to the truth will now guide us to the next existence, the E." 6 women exchanged quick glances. This was the moment they had prepared for, perhaps their last chance. As they began to sing, their voices rising in perfect harmony, Rachel discreetly observed the exits. Marcus and 3 guards were positioned at the doors, all armed. Other faithful followers of Krieger were strategically distributed around the room, ready to intervene if anyone showed resistance. The music they sang was one they had secretly practiced, a song that began as a traditional religious hymn, but gradually transformed into something different, with dissonant chords and lyrics that subtly questioned authority and false prophecy. Some of the older followers began to stir, realizing the change in the message. Krieger also noticed, his face gradually hardening, but before he could interrupt, the lights in the sanctuary flickered and went out, leaving only the candles as illumination. "The moment has arrived," announced Krieger, seizing the power failure. "As a divine sign. The signs are here. The outside world is being destroyed, as I prophesied. Now we will drink together from the cup of liberation." He gestured to Marcus, who began filling small cups with the blue liquid from the central container. At that moment, Rachel gave the combined signal, a sustained high note that pierced the air. In perfect synchronization, the 6 women moved. Deborah and Melissa knocked over chandeliers strategically, creating pockets of confusion. Elise and Anna Claire ran to the children, pulling them away from the center. And Rachel, with the strength of decades of contained rage, lunged at the central container, knocking it over before the distribution of the drink could begin. The blue liquid spilled across the floor, while screams and chaos spread through the sanctuary. Marcus and the guards advanced, weapons drawn. "Treason!" shouted Krieger, his face distorted by rage. "See how the enemy reveals itself in the final moment. They never truly believed." Rachel stood up, facing the man who had stolen 26 years of her life. "You're not a prophet," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in decades. "You're a monster who feeds on the fear and faith of others. And it's over, Jonah. It's over today." Marcus pointed his gun directly at her. "Father, allow me to silence this heretic." Krieger nodded slowly. "Do it, my son, and after her anyone who shows doubt." It was at this moment that the windows of the sanctuary shattered simultaneously. Figures in tactical gear quickly entered, while an amplified voice sounded from outside. "This is the FBI. Drop your weapons. I repeat, drop your weapons." The chaos that followed was a mixture of screams, commands, and the sound of gunfire. Marcus fired at the agents while Krieger tried to reach a spare vial of poison in his pocket. Some of the more fanatical followers resisted. Others surrendered immediately, confused and terrified. Rachel pulled children and other women behind a column, protecting them with her own body. Through the confusion, she saw an FBI agent advancing, methodically in their direction. A woman with dark hair and determined eyes who seemed to be looking specifically for her. "Rachel Brooks?" asked the agent as she approached. "I'm Lena Truitt. I've come to get you, you and the others." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. You received our messages?" "All of them," confirmed Lena. "Your return to the bus, Jacobs? Tape your radio signal last night. We were on our way before the last transmission." A gunshot rang out near them, and Lena pushed Rachel down, shielding her. When they looked again, they saw Marcus lying wounded but alive, being apprehended by agents. In the center of the hall, Jonah Krieger was surrounded, the vial of poison still in his hand. "There is no salvation for you out there," he shouted, looking directly at Rachel. "The world you want so badly to return to no longer exists. There is nothing but this community." Lena approached him calmly, her hands visible. "Mr. Krieger, it's over. There's no need for more violence." For a moment it seemed he would drink the poison himself. His eyes darted between the vial and the women who had defied his authority. Then, in a swift motion, he tried to hurl the contents in their direction, only to be tackled by tactical agents before he could complete the gesture. As they led him away in handcuffs, he shouted apocalyptic prophecies and curses. But his words now sounded empty. His power over his followers finally broken. In the hours that followed, the compound was evacuated. Medical teams attended to the wounded and checked the health of the followers. Specialized psychologists began the delicate process of talking with the children born into the cult, and Rachel, along with Deborah, Elise, Anna Claire, Patricia, and Melissa, were taken to a safe area where they could finally breathe the air of freedom. At the hospital in Tiu, Sandpoint the next morning, Rachel watched through the window as the sun rose. It was a dawn like she hadn't seen in decades. No fences, no guards, no fear. Beside her a phone rang. "She's here," said Lena, entering the room. "There's someone who wants to talk to you very much." An elderly woman entered hesitantly, steps uncertain. Completely white hair, a face marked by time, but the same intense green eyes that Rachel saw every morning in her own reflection. "Mum," Rachel whispered, and the world seemed to stop for a moment. Helen Brooks ran to her daughter, embracing her as if afraid she might disappear again. "You came back," sobbed Helen, stroking her daughter's grey hair. "You really came back." "To me." The other women of Promise Path were soon reunited with their own families. For some, they were emotional reunions. For others, like Melissa, whose parents had died during her absence, it was a bittersweet moment. 3 weeks later, in a small chapel in Seattle, the 6 women gathered again. No longer prisoners, no longer victims, but survivors. They were there for a specific purpose, one that Rachel had suggested during her recovery. A small group of people occupied the pews, family members, FBI agents including Lena, and a few selected journalists. A piano was positioned in front, along with microphones. Rachel, now dressed in colorful clothes for the first time in 26 years, looked at her friends, her sisters, in a journey that no one else could fully understand. "Ready?" she asked. They nodded, forming a semicircle as they had done hundreds of times before. But this time, there was no fear, no secret code, no hidden message. Just music, pure, honest, liberating. Their voices rose in harmony, more mature than when they were young, carrying the weight and wisdom of everything they had faced. The song was one that Rachel had composed during her first nights of freedom, a ballad about darkness and light, prison and redemption, and the strength they found in each other. In the audience, Lena watched with admiration. The Promise Path. Case had been officially closed. Jonah Krieger and his son Marcus would face trial for kidnapping, abuse, attempted mass homicide, and various other crimes. The manipulated members of the cult were receiving psychological help and support for reintegration into society. But here in this moment, what mattered was the music. The music that had been silenced for 26 years and now could finally be heard. After the performance, as people gathered to talk, Rachel approached Lena. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know it wasn't just another unsolved cold case?" Lena smiled. "You left breadcrumbs along the way, small signs that you were still fighting even after so long. And when I started following those signs, well, I just couldn't stop." Rachel looked at her friends, now chatting animatedly with family members and journalists. "What happens now?" she asked. "After so long inside, I don't know if I can just live normally." "One day at a time," Lena replied. "You've already proven to be stronger than most people will ever need to be. The rest is just learning to be free again." 6 months later, in a small recording studio, the Promise Path gathered again. No longer as the 20-year-olds they had been, but as mature women who had survived the unimaginable. They recorded an album that told their story, not just of captivity, but of resistance, true faith, and the strength found in unity. Rachel, now living with her mother and slowly rebuilding her life, kept a photograph on the nightstand beside her bed. It wasn't one of the old band photos, nor one of the many that had been taken since their rescue. It was a picture of the rusty bus being removed from the mine, the vehicle that had been both the beginning of their nightmare and, finally, the key to their liberation. On the back of the photo, she had written a simple sentence: "Even buried." For 26 years, the truth found a way out. Every night, before falling asleep in her soft bed, a luxury that still felt strange after decades on a hard straw mattress, Rachel sent a text message to the other 5 women, a different word each night, but always ending with the same phrase, "We survived, and now finally we live."